Hello and welcome to the City of Glendale's Historic Preservation Commission meeting for March 16th, 2017. Roll call, please.
Sure. Commissioner Caragnati?
Present.
Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Commissioner Shire?
Here.
Commissioner Vartanian? Absent. Commissioner Vidor?
Here.
Thank you for present.
The agenda for this meeting was posted on or before Monday, March 13th, 2017 on the bulletin board outside of City Hall. We have the minutes. Do we have any additions or corrections to the minutes as written?
I have a minor correction. There are 2 number 8s.
Okay.
That's all.
We will change the second number 8 to number 9. Motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
A second.
All in favor? Everybody.
Aye.
The minutes are approved, and we will go on to oral communications. Sean Bursell.
Thank you, members of the Commission. I'm Sean Bursell, and I'm the Executive Director of the Glendale Historical Society. And I'm here to announce today our second annual Restoration Expo, which will be held Sunday, April the 23rd, at the Doctor's House Lawn and Gazebo in Brand Park on West Mountain. We'll be holding it from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m., and it's free and open to the public. What we're going to do is we're going to have about 3 dozen exhibitors with all types of services like rehabilitation, windows restoration and repair, wood restoration, tile experts, glass providers, landscapers, interior designers to help people who want to rehabilitate their vintage homes in the appropriate fashion. And we're going to have about 3 dozen different exhibitors there to show their services and their wares and how people can rehabilitate their homes appropriately or just maintain them appropriately. We're also going to have a series of gazebo talks. We're going to have one on approaches to energy efficiency and sustainability in historic homes. Another one on historic woods, which I'm particularly interested in because I've got a lot of wood in my house. We're going to have a tile expert talking about historic tile, architectural terracotta, and Batchelder tile. We're going to have another speaker. The final speaker is going to be on preserving and restoring native California landscapes for year-round beauty. So we've got a great program. Again, it's our Restoration Expo, Sunday, April the 23rd, from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the Doctor's House Lawn and Gazebo. And again, it is free and open to the public. So we hope to see you there and members of the public there. And I believe the Historic Preservation Commission you had a booth last year.
They don't know about it yet, but yeah.
Okay. All right. I did. That was all right. I guess that was a spoiler. All right.
No, I was going to mention it too. But we have been asked to have a booth again. I said I'm sure we'll be able to work out staffing for that, and I'm just waiting to send you guys a message. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kathy Horrenda.
Hi, my name's Kathy Horrenda, and I'm here today to urge you to fix the leaky roof of the old gas station building at Adams Square Mini Park. As you know, Adams Hill neighborhood fought hard to preserve this old building, and it's become the centerpiece of our mini park and the iconic feature of Adams Hill. In fact, last July you may have attended an event we had in the park celebrating its listing on the Glendale's Register of Historic Resources. And in the past few years, in answer to the hopes of many in Adams Hill, the Library Arts and Culture Department has begun to organize the use of the gas station as an art gallery. At our latest art reception in January, over 40 members of the neighborhood wrote out their hopes and dreams, and they were placed into bottles and hung as part of the current art installation. And I mention this because I want to assure you that the gas station building is well used and a beloved member of our community. Unfortunately, last Thanksgiving, when we were installing the neighborhood holiday display, it started to rain, and we experienced many leaks in the building. And since then, I know the city has attempted to repair the roof, but it continues to have problems. And we would hate to see that these leaks would jeopardize the future of the gas station as an art gallery since this program is just getting started. Also, while the city has repaired one of the walls which had rusted through, it is a metal building, and as the water continues to seep inside, this will be an issue for the structure. We're all hoping that Southern California will get rain. And so I'm urging you to fix this building at this time so we'll be ready when it starts to rain again. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that we had talked about the gas station, and this is not an agendized item for today, and there are some things
In response to public concern,
Yes.
we can talk about it.
Oh, okay.
And
So,
good news for everyone. We were having a little trouble just getting communication back and forth between departments. That's been completely resolved. I just talked to the person who works for facilities in conjunction with parks. The budget's been identified for this out of CIP funds. I approved the method of repair, which is basically going to be applying a kind of a fiberglass mesh to the roof, which will then have I'm not sure if it's elastomeric, but it's going to have a kind of a rubberized coating. It's an interesting roof system, and that was my original concern. I didn't want that to be completely, even though it's not visible from the street, I thought they needed to take that into account. It turns out they did, and the issue that started this whole thing was that 2 of the 3 drains were blocked. So Parks is going to put it into their maintenance plan so that the drains and the gutters are kind of routinely looked at each year as needed, and then they're going to be starting the repair work sometime soon. I think it's imminent, so I can't say if it's this next week or the week after, but it'll happen soon, and the repairs won't be visible from the street. One concern I had was originally they said they were going to be putting some sort of lip around the outside of the building, which if they had to do that, we'd approve it, but I didn't think they needed to. It turns out they don't. So we're going to keep the look exactly as it is. And then the good news is when they went up there, they identified some rusted areas of the roof deck, and they're going to fix, kind of repair the roof, the rusted areas before they put the new roof layer on top of it. So
that's really good news, because it is a highly used little facility, and there had been some information floating around that the roof was actually going to be replaced. So it's good to hear what's actually going to happen. That obviously is not the case and not necessary.
Right.
So that's
Yeah,
great.
I want to keep it intact.
Okay. Any idea about the timing of this? or-
I think soon. I
Soon.
think within, I'm always optimistic. I
Yeah.
say a week or two, it could be within the month.
Okay.
But the money's identified, the contractor's identified, and the method of repair has been selected.
Oh,
so I think we're
fantastic.
good.
Very good. Okay. Good to know. Thank you for bringing that up. And now comments from commissioners. Anybody have anything?
I have one. I'm kind of the voice for the moment. The Historical Society of the Crescenta Valley, having something like Irwin Allen's thing, they're going to have Flood Path, the deadliest man-made disaster of the 20th century America and the making of modern Los Angeles. The near failure of the Oroville Dam brings up the history of a dam that did fail right here in Los Angeles in 1928. Flood Path will detail the events of the St. Francis Dam disaster, the tragic loss of hundreds of lives, the reason for the collapse, and the aftermath. John Wilkman is an award-winning documentary filmmaker. His television series, Moguls and Movie Stars, A History of Hollywood, was named one of the year's top 10 programs by the New York Daily News and the Wall Street Journal, and nominated for 3 Emmy Awards, including writing. Wilkman also is the author of several books on LA history. He will have his latest book, Flood Path, on hand for signing. Join us on Monday, April 20th at 7 p.m. at the La Crescenta Center for Spiritual Living, located on the corner of Dunsmore and Santa Carlotta. So I encourage you all to come. It's just a little hop, skip, and a jump up the hill from downtown Glendale.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. I have an announcement, and I think I have a little visual there. In the spirit of adaptive reuse for artistic purposes, this weekend around the world, Bach in the Subways is a crowdsource event that takes place where musicians show up in train stations and public places in every imaginable place you can conceive of, including Glendale. So on March 18th, the Pasadena Conservancy's Children's Cello Ensemble will be playing at the station at noon. This is at 400 West Cerritos, the historic train depot, and I'm sure that'll be a lot of fun. And then on Sunday, March 19th, from 10 a.m. to noon, the Cantabile Chamber players of Glendale will be playing. Of course, both will be playing Bach music at the train station on March 19th from 10 a.m. to noon. So hopefully everybody will make a stop over there and help us celebrate Bach's birthday. We're going to party like it's 1685. Okay, thank you.
I didn't bring up music for that.
What?
Had a
Oh,
brand
that
new
would have been terrific. Okay, well, we'll save it for the weekend.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
Well, if you guys attend, this picture reminds me, when you go to the train station, an overlooked detail that I don't think everyone sees is the ironwork above the entry doors, which you can see part of here with these two figures and some cool stuff, but there's a little kind of choo-choo train across the top.
Oh.
That is one of my favorite little details, architectural things in Glendale, so
Not in the
if you're
picture.
out there, check it out.
Okay, will do. Thank you. Okay, we don't have any old business, so let's go right to new business and start with 915 East Mountain Street.
Okay. This is the first of our two Glendale Register and Mills Act nominations for tonight. And 915 East Mountain is in the Ross Moyne neighborhood. So you see this beautiful Spanish colonial revival house. Here we are on the map between Cordova and Carmen on the north side of Mountain. This is not in the historic district, so we're outside of the district here. This is actually in the Bellhurst Hill Slopes neighborhood, which we've told people is a potential historic district. We'd love to see that come forward at some point, but it's great to have one of the houses in the neighborhood. We've already designated a few others in the area, so this won't be the first one. It's high-quality architecture all around. This house was built in 1928. It's the work of builders who were probably also working as designers, which is often the case, but we don't know too much about them. Angelo Basolo Jr. and Vincenzo A. Gualano. They had a contracting firm. They did some other buildings that I'll show you in a minute that we know of, and it appears that they built the house on spec. One of them, along with his wife, were the original owner. We don't know that they ever lived in the house. The first residents were David and Minnie Fink, who had come to the Glendale area from Minneapolis. David himself was originally from Egypt, but going through, I did some of the research myself to kind of flesh this out. But he may have also been from Russia, and I can't believe that he was from both. So there was conflicting evidence in the record, but Egypt seemed to be more common there. So I kind of went with that just to put it down here. He worked in the hospitality business, in restaurants, hotels. We don't know much more about him than that. Per our naming policy, since we have the first owner that we know, we're recommending that if you recommend designation, that this be called the Fink House or the David and Minnie Fink House. It's really quite a remarkable property architecturally when you start looking at the details. And as you know, we don't look at interiors for Glendale Register designations or even for our Mills Act contracts, but just to put it out there, not only does this house have very nice massing detailing and just use of a lot of the traditional features we associate with the style, it's got some more unusual features and then is also very intact inside and out. So looking at what we have here, it's on an uphill lot. So we have the garage at street level, unlike the house that we looked at last year that had a garage kind of in front of the house that was added. This is the original configuration, which is kind of typical on these upslope sites. Even the ironwork on the stairs and much, if not all, of the ironwork on the house appears to be original. We have this nice configuration of the single-story mass, which kind of reads as the living room mass on the left, and then we have the L-shaped house with the two-story mass from the front that extends toward the back. And the more you look at it, the more you just see there are lots and lots of nice details on this house, including a few that I've selected in the photos. The entry turret is a classic feature. It's one of the few that I know of that actually has a bathroom in the upstairs of the turret, which is not likely original, but I did express my interest and suggest to the owners that it might be the best bathroom in town. It's the best view. But again, that's not part of the designation. But even this, the corbelled projection at the second floor, the nice colonnettes between the arched windows. All of the windows in the house but one appear to be original steel sash. We have the Churrigueresque detailing around the door. The door itself appears to be the original paneled wood door. Lots of leaded glass that I'll show you in a minute. The house has a large basement area that is partially above grade, so these two windows at the lower photo are the basement windows. And then we have these really nice shaped windows that are on the living room. These are screens in front of the original wood doors, but you have the French doors behind the screens, but everything's shaped to follow the shape of the opening. Around the back of the house, like with many of our properties of any style from this period, the level of detailing on the front doesn't necessarily extend to the back, but I think this house has more kind of interesting detailing at the sides and rear than some of the properties that we've put on the register. You can see some of the arched-headed windows at the second level on the lower right photo, and then we have these nice kind of entry doors on the right or in the center going into the living room. On the left, we have this kind of projecting feature with the kind of bay and the kind of coved area above the bays that provide some interest. Not sure that these steps or necessarily even the ironwork are original. There were some issues, but can't say exactly for sure. Interesting chimney shroud. Side facades continue to have some interesting details. The projecting bay on the east facade, and then this really heavy buttress on the west facade. That's kind of at the front of the house with the two arched windows opening, flanking the fireplace in the living room. Here's the amazing stained glass that we see throughout the house, one of the better collections that I've seen, especially with this crazy pirate kind of character, but just eclectic, fun stained glass. I included two pictures of some of the wrought iron light fixtures that appear to be original, certainly of the period, that were also kind of eclectic and interesting. The backyard has been altered. We don't have a date for the pool from any permit record, but we can start guessing that it's 1980s-ish. I don't remember.
We were told like early 70s.
70s-ish, so definitely an alteration, not too far off from some of the things we've seen on other designated properties, definitely differentiated from the original. It almost certainly wouldn't have had a pool originally. There are only a couple of significant alterations on the house. Probably the one that's most noticeable and egregious to me are these two light fixtures at the garage, which is right on the street, which are just completely inappropriate. We've recommended a staff condition that those be changed into something more appropriate to the Spanish style. The two lower pictures show a slab door that was installed at the side facade that just would have originally had some sort of panel detail. Our recommendation is to put in a paneled door, and depending on the interests of the owners, possibly with a glazed panel or a window, the way some of these kind of utility side doors often have. And then there's an aluminum window opening into the space at the right, and we're recommending, since we know what was there before, we're recommending that new steel sash or possibly aluminum sash be installed there. And I mention aluminum because we had great success finding a manufacturer that makes aluminum windows that come very, very close to the appearance of steel windows at substantially lower cost. Those are the windows that were on, so I can't believe I'm forgetting the address, 1033? Mountain 1333, but an issue that came up several times with the commission, and the owner replaced the illegal vinyl windows with these aluminum, and we felt that they came very close to the appearance of steel, so we were pleased with the results there. The garage door is also a replacement door. I think it's in keeping with traditional kind of plain doors that we see. I've added it as a consideration for the commission to think if you would like to see that replaced. I'm not sure that we've been consistent with replacement garage doors, but I didn't want to ignore the fact that that's a replacement. The applicants had suggested in the application that there might be some level of significance for the association with Bassano and what's his name? Basolo and Gualano. And we don't really have enough information to make any determination. It's, in general, I've mentioned over the years that it's hard to say that one work by an architect is more significant than others unless you really tell the story of their career. The applicants did track down a couple of other buildings in Los Angeles that were designed by them. 2 apartment buildings, both with strange paint jobs that are kind of horrible. I have no idea how that's kind of weird coincidence, or maybe descendants of one of the architects own them still. Not amazing works of architecture, but it's always fun to have the context for things that we look at here. But when we looked at this house and kind of placed it in context with other Glendale Register properties, the level of integrity, the number of features, this kind of special character that it has, made it feel clear that it met criterion 3 for designation as a really outstanding example of Spanish colonial revival in Glendale. So we're recommending that the commission recommend to council that this be put on the register, that a mills contract be approved. Before I move on to the mills contract, we never show interior features, but this is so remarkable, and I wanted to put it out because in the application, the applicants suggest that it could be Muresque tile, which comes from Oakland. I did a little background research, couldn't confirm that, but there are at least 3 companies, Claycraft, Malibu, and then this Muresque, and probably others that did Mayan kind of stuff. And I couldn't find anything that looks like this, but it is pretty remarkable. And
I give you an example.
hold on, we can't. Yeah, we have to get when you're testifying. Sorry, but in terms of conditions for the Mills Act, we are recommending that that the light fixtures be replaced, the window be replaced, the door, and then consider the garage door. And that's everything we have for this one.
We have a speaker card here for Kathleen Clark to come up and talk a bit about her house.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Clark. Most of you know I've talked to at length, but to follow up on the Muresque fireplace, no, I'm not certain either, but there was a very close example of it because that detail is it's sort of more outlandish tile style than you normally find in any of the other potteries, whether it's Claycraft, Oakland, or Batchelder. But that's inside. Outside, I guess one thing that really stuck out to us when we found the house was there's something quite striking about the situation, how the house is situated on this little hill. And it faces mountain in a pocket of mostly, I'd say, 40s houses. I haven't researched everything, but 40s, 50s. So it was the first house on that block, unless something burned down. It had and has a very stately presence, and it kind of sits there like a beacon. But mostly when you get closer, there's just like 100 little details that are so much fun. And I think I drove our realtor crazy because I was going through the house and it's like, this house is an adventure. It was, as I told you, most of you, that it was in kind of miserable shape. The back was covered up with a giant trellis. It was dark. It was covered with sort of bad 60s granny colonial decor, and hardware and wood and everything that just sort of covered all the Spanish details, but it was all there. So, it wasn't really a diamond in the rough, but you just chip away and it's quite something. But I don't know. I'm crazy about the neighborhood, crazy about the house. There's more we want to do to it, and we didn't do much on the outside. I had a structural check yesterday on the garage wall, and it's still hanging in there. But we need to do a lot of wood restoration of the windows, and I think, as you saw, we care very much about history and not undoing anything. We don't want to add a lot of modernity. We want to clean it up and have it be strong and last until whoever the next shepherds are. You know, if the stairs get to be too much in 10 years, you know, then somebody else can navigate it. But you know, we really are. We could use the help in the status to continue to do the outside work. And I don't know. If there's anybody else have any questions that you want to see the house just anytime.
Just
yeah.
out of
Sure.
sheer interest, because
But if there's anything,
and the staff report really stimulated my imagination about what the windows and some of the details.
yeah, if there's anything that anybody wants to know at this point, one of the things I think the slides couldn't really show is the detail on the ironwork on the balconettes. There's heart shapes on everything. All the wrought iron have hearts on them all the way up the stairs. The front door peephole is, and it's the original door. You know, all have heart shapes within the structures of all the ironwork throughout. And I counted. We have 12 leaded glass windows. They're not all hand painted, but there are a bunch more. They're just in odd places that you can't necessarily see from the street, but they're all intact and preserved and aren't going anywhere. And I don't know. Is that good? Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for your consideration and all your time.
Thank you very much. So we'll now have comments. Should we go in alphabetical order and just start with C? Okay.
This house is just really great. You should go back and see it. It really, like he was saying, it just sort of unfolds as you walk. There's so many fine little details there, and it's really kind of a work of art. We see a lot of beautiful houses, but this one was very intricate. Those leaded glass windows, everything about it was just very, very finely done. So I think it's great that, ladies, that you're bringing this forward. Another one that can be saved. And we say a lot in our business, I sell houses, and we say that there's a lot of times where there's preservation by neglect. And it sounds like in your case it wasn't so much neglect as it was just kind of covering it up. So fortunately, they didn't ruin everything, and you're able to bring it all back. In a very odd way, they loved it, in their own way. So anyway, thank you for bringing it forward. I think it's great. I agree with staff's recommendations myself. The garage doors, like you said, I think is a great consideration if it's something you want to do down the road. I don't necessarily think it's something that has to be done. But maybe as needed, when that door deteriorates, you could go to something a little slightly different. But otherwise, I think it's all great, and I agree with everything in the staff report. Thanks.
Thank you. M?
That would be me.
I just wanted to say that I'm never really impressed by, we have so many Spanish colonial revival houses in Glendale and on the Glendale Register, but this one is just unique. As I'm always saying, I used to ride my bicycle past it, and I did, and you can feel it. And I always say that sometimes the house finds the buyer, and I think this house found you. Your attention to detail and the fact that we got to go inside and see all the stuff that you have done. And the outside, it's amazing. I mean, if any house should be on the Glendale Register, this is one of them, because it's just a house that you point at once you notice it's there. And I'm glad that you brought it forward, because, like I said, I used to ride my bicycle past it all the time, and I never really noticed it. But it's a really good house. I just do have a kind of a question, which has to do with the Mills Act and the pool. Only in that when we put the house that was on Royal Boulevard and the pool, and, we were kind of saying, well, it shouldn't be on the Royal House because the pool detracted from the house itself. I'm just curious. They kind of seem the same to me in a little way. So is there some way that you can, I know, Desiree, you were talking about the Royal House and the problem with their pool.
Yeah, I can share my comments.
Okay, on that.
If you're done. But.
I'm pretty much, I like the house. I think it should be on the Glendale Register. I just have a question about, when we do the Mills Act and we do the whole property, just that. And I know we have given the Mills Act on a lot of other properties which had problems. So that's my only concern, but it's not something that should deny it being on the Glendale Register. So,
Thank you.
I guess S is up.
You're up.
Well, anyway, thank you for bringing this house before us. It is beautiful. It's so rich with details, just gorgeous architectural gems from tile work to iron work to beautiful stucco detailing. And yeah, it was a real treat to see it. I love also the vertical nature of the house on mountain. You know, I live really at the mountain street level, and so just to climb up and to see the views get better and better as you get to the top, you don't realize, you know, living so close to it that you have just incredible views just up a few stories. So yeah, I completely agree with staff reports to recommend this for the Historic Register. I agree with the conditions. I also think for consistency of some other houses that we have looked at, we should put as a condition to replace the garage door. Again, it's so prominent in this house. I think it'll only just elevate the level of the house that you already are taking such good care of. When it comes to the pool, I actually agree with Mike. I think we should put that into the Mills Act as a condition, even if we give it out quite a few years to take care of it, because I think it detracts from the beautiful nature of the house and understanding it was done at a period that, you know, wasn't really taking into account this beautiful architectural gem, and the pool really takes away from that. So I think we should put in there to at least replace the tile at some period if we want to just even give it, you know, 3 to 5 years time frame, whatever would be reasonable. But I think, yeah, again, for consistency with some of the other houses that we've considered, you know, when the pool was done and really, yeah, it can be set apart differently, but so dramatically that it takes away from the integrity. I think that could be looked at in the future. So those are my thoughts on the pool.
I would agree. Yes, I mean, to be consistent, you know, we're saying one thing on the Royal House, and we can't turn around and not say the same thing here.
The Royal House hasn't been decided yet. You haven't put conditions on that property, and the owner is going to be coming back to a hearing.
Comments. We've made comments.
You've made comments, yes.
Yes.
So I just want to...
Okay.
I think the reason they withdrew is because we were headed in the direction of kind of codifying requirements, but they wanted to kind of go back and think about it. So we are being consistent with our
Comments.
Yeah, no,
comments.
I'm not suggesting
Okay.
otherwise. I just
Yeah.
wanted to clarify.
Okay.
Our evaluation.
We
Right.
haven't made a, because they may be coming back with something that you may or may not approve. So.
Right, yeah. Well, thank you all very much. I did get to the house during the week. Unfortunately, wasn't able to come on the weekend, and I did use my cell phone to zoom in a little bit on the details on the front. And of course, just looking at what I could see from the public right-of-way was really extraordinary. And I, you know, particularly from a historic perspective, like the Chiriguresque surround on the door, because that kind of harkens back to the type of architecture at the Pan-Pacific Exposition of 1915 that eventually became Balboa Park in San Diego, that really started the whole craze for Spanish revival in the Americas, and especially in the United States. So, you know, we don't have a lot of those types of doors and that fabulous detail work in Glendale, so it's nice to see that and all the other spectacular features. And of course, we, the commissioners, I'll speak for everybody, they've already spoken for themselves, really appreciate the kind of stewardship you're giving the house. I also, I wasn't there, I assumed that, you know, we're talking about some replacements here. The things that you detailed in your report seem completely logical and appropriate, and I would encourage there to be a timeline with maybe a prioritization on what's necessary. Certainly if there's anything that's deteriorating, or, you know, obviously I wasn't there to see the details and nobody pointed anything out, but if you had any wood or wrought iron that was in danger of rot, then that would be first, but everything that's on the list should be done. I also think we need to, I haven't seen it, so I'm really, you know, talking third hand here, but in the pictures and from what I've heard, the pool and the back area have some features that really should be looked at in terms of maybe bringing them a little closer into the spectacular style of the house. And tile, obviously, is a good way to handle that. I don't know about the rest of the decorative work, the patios and the type of brickwork that's used there, if anybody feels anything, if anyone has an opinion about that, maybe we could discuss that a little bit, since we're going in that direction, and talk about, you know, exactly what it would be that we would envision Is that appropriate? No,
Sorry, when
not
we're
yet.
in a public hearing, if they open.
We're in a public hearing, and when we're done talking, we'll hold your thoughts, please, and we'll reopen, and you'll come back up. Okay.
Yeah, and you guys drive the boat in terms of conditions. I would remind you that we have approved many properties over the years.
No.
Almost every house we approve has
It's
a
a
pool.
pool.
Almost every pool was installed at a point that makes it less original.
Mm-hmm.
And so putting conditions on tile work and everything, but I would, and again, this is going to council however you want it to go to council, but I would also try to be fair in terms of previous decisions, but you're not bound by those decisions. If over the years, the commission decides that to offer Mills Act contracts, which benefit owners financially to a great degree, if you find that it's worth asking people to invest in the property to bring it to the conditions that you want, that's totally appropriate. And then the owners have the option of not moving forward with the designation if they don't feel it's appropriate or that they can handle it. So,
Go ahead.
I guess I have a question about how, let's say we made no comment about the pool at all, and at some point the ladies decided they wanted to make a change to the pool. Every pool has to be replastered eventually, and they probably don't like the tile that's there anyway. If we hadn't put any condition on it, because it's a feature of the property, is that something that would come before staff anyway?
yeah, generally, yeah, all pool work, all of that requires a
Right.
permit, so it comes to us. We've worked recently on a couple of pools that took out some, just the little coping tiles along the edge of the water line, and have put in more kind of colorful, kind of more Spanish tiles in the case of the one Spanish house.
Working with staff on that.
Yeah, and that-
right?
and
They
that's-
didn't just decide
yeah,
to do
that's-
that. They worked with staff and came up with
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
Because my concern is that when that we maybe that from this position, I'm concerned that we end up maybe doing a little too much design and maybe a little too heavy-handed at times, or not giving enough direction, and then it's left a little bit too gray. It seems to me something like a pool is the kind of thing that eventually will have to be attended to. Maybe not specifically the tile, but I feel like if they have to work with staff on pretty much everything on the exterior anyway, I'm not sure that we need to necessarily put a condition on it that it has to be done by a certain amount of time. It's going to naturally come up anyway. And I wasn't here for the Royal Boulevard discussion, and I think I have a different position than some of my colleagues on that one in particular. Because I know that there have been situations where some vague conditions have been placed on some properties that were rather vague, and homeowners have struggled to come into line on some of them. And I think we just have to be very careful if we're putting a condition either to be extremely, extremely specific about it, exactly what we want, or loosen the reins a little bit and leave it up to the homeowners and staff to figure it out. That's just a concern I have.
And it just, I think I know what property you're talking about, and the lesson that I think both staff and the commission have learned from that is we're not going to move forward with vague conditions from now on. We're really going to try to nail those down, just like we do with the design review board. We try to make this process as close to that as possible. But your point, that's a point for you all to discuss in terms of whether to let this happen when it naturally happens, or whether to put it as a condition today. And but one way or the other, whether it's a condition now, or if we had direction from the commission about what their goals are for this type of project, that would help guide staff implementing things in the future. For example, the house I just mentioned, I think I approved something that I believe if it had come to you, if it had to come to you, I think everyone would have been happy with it. Very, very simple, and just kind of adding a little character. So, but yeah, so with conditions, it's a good reminder that we will be asking for as precise a condition as we can in the future. So.
Well,
Yeah, I think-
go ahead. No, go
I
ahead.
think the recommendation would be to put it as a condition so that we know that it will be improved, and we can leave it to staff as far as the exact tile and look and feel, because obviously we trust staff's opinion, and you can work it out at that level. But what we won't say is something vague like renovate the pool. I think we learned
Yeah.
from that, if it's tile replacement, more in keeping with the period of the home, to upgrade the level of integrity of the house, like that can give staff enough to work with. The reason why I say I think we should put in a time frame, because there are substantial financial benefits from Mills Act properties in order to maintain and upgrade and to keep properties at the level that we want to see them. So I think it would be fair enough as long as we give enough time frame that it's reasonable to the owners and that the owners would agree to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think if I recall, just to go back to that house on Royal, which is the closest analogy I can think of right now, one of the things that came up, and Kathleen, you'll get your opportunity to, speak on this anyway, is that we were concerned about the back there because there was just an incredibly large amount of hardscape, and most of it didn't really converse too well with the house's architecture. And we were talking a lot about not only the pool and maybe changing the tile, but also softening the look of the back area because it was so incredibly dense on hardscape. So I guess I would ask the question, is this the same situation, or is this a different
No,
situation?
it's slightly
It's
different.
different.
Yeah, it's slightly different.
All right, so that wasn't the issue here.
Yeah,
Okay.
and
Well,
the one difference between the two is the Royal House, when I went to visit to kind of think about how we'd proceed with that, had such a limited amount of usable flat area that my initial sense coming away from the hearing was that we would do some saw cuts, create some planted areas, and then see what else was going to happen. The reality of putting furniture and using that area, there's no space for the saw cuts. They're working with a landscape designer right now. It's ongoing, so I think it'll be coming back to you in the next couple of months at least. They're looking at landscape solutions for a lot of the problems, which may or may not meet what you're looking for. Here, I think if it's, this tile is a little more glaring, it seems there's a difference here. When I looked at the site, I'm very much prepared to say a house can be on the register with some fairly significant alterations to the landscaping. But the tile did jump out at me. The slump stone did jump out at me. But like I said, this is completely, once we get consensus, just like we do with the design review board, there'll be a motion made. We'll discuss those conditions. After the motion is made or through the discussion, I think it's fair to reopen the hearing, especially to check on the time frame, if the owner's open to doing the work you're looking for, to give us some input on the time frame so that we're not imposing something that's impossible.
I just had one more comment, too. Last year, we sat through the Secretary of Interior thing.
Yes.
And one of the things that stood out to me was that when a historic property, in the case of what we were learning about were mostly public buildings and things, but when they were modified later, or modifications were to be done later, they were never supposed to actually try to mimic the history of the property. They were always supposed to be very different from that was something that kind of stuck out at me, that it wasn't so much about trying to make it look like it was once original and old, so much as actually trying to make it seem very different, and that there were properties that they didn't want to historically designate because modifications were made to them that tried to look like it was original, but it wasn't. So I philosophically kind of have a hard time with it being a goal of something as modern as a swimming pool that we know wasn't original anyway, having to try to sort of manipulate it to make it seem like maybe it was. It just doesn't seem, that doesn't seem necessarily appropriate.
That's not my intent. I don't know if you're referring to my comments.
No, just sort of in general.
That's not my intent at all. You don't want a clash of styles. You want it to be in keeping with the style. There is never an intent to replicate what was or go back and make something be as if it was put in originally.
Yeah.
But the tile work would be sensitive to the style. It would be in keeping with the overall integrity of the home. So those would be the words and phrases, not, oh great, let's build this super modern pool to juxtapose this, 1928 Spanish style. That wouldn't be something we would go after or encourage approval of.
Yeah.
And one thing here is it's this balance you have to strike. You want it to be different, but you want it to be harmonious. Hard to do sometimes.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is this pool, there were pools in houses in the 20s, so it's not like pools didn't exist, but pools at that time did not look like this pool. They wouldn't have had this terracing, they wouldn't have had the high wall, the back wall looking like it does. So that structure, just the form of the pool alone, sets it out as a non-original pool. So it probably does give a little more flexibility in terms of if you did put a more traditional Spanish type tile on it to create that harmony, you'd still be saying, hey, this is a modern pool, but it's kind of tying together a little better if that's the direction you guys want to go.
Can you see?
And the standards are, they're not rules. It's like that. I love this kind of discussion because it's time for us to kind of come to how do we apply, how does this commission apply the standards to properties? You guys ultimately have that kind of authority. So.
It's like the parachute place that we approved, had that whole new annex added onto it that was completely not at all related at all architecturally to the original building.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't seem to be an issue when we approved that. It seemed a totally fine thing because it was completely different and you could still see through the windows to the old structure that was there, and it all felt very appropriate. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, it does feel like every situation is going to be slightly unique, right? And so I guess our challenge is to kind of try to be as evenly fair, I guess.
On the pictures that you have in your report, can you see or point out what it is we're even discussing here? Because there are a lot of materials there, and I'm not sure.
What I'm hearing is the focus is on this back wall with this tile. One of the aspects of tile like this is traditional tiles tend to be smaller than these. Are large tiles that are broken up through their design to kind of look like smaller tiles. So it's a different concept. This brick and concrete, I don't imagine that this is so common on these houses, and I think does kind of blend in, even though we know it's not original. I wouldn't expect that we'd be concerned about that. And then, when I looked at the slump stone, we discussed, because I'm somewhat more open to changes in these areas, this didn't bother me. But ultimately, it's the commission's decision, not mine. So but I would say these are the three aspects of the rear yard that seem to be the changes that have been made that you're talking about. But so far, I've only heard a real focus on this tile.
Well, yeah, I wasn't so concerned about the walls at this point because when we were there, the owners mentioned, they're sensitive to those as well. And as they kind of morphed this beautiful home, they were kind of restuccoing things and kind of hiding some of those non-original features to be a little more convenient. So I think that was probably in their plan. Really more the pool and the tile, or I should say the pool tile stuck out with, just a little more jarring compared to the gorgeous, high integrity Spanish home.
Mm-hmm. And I assume, obviously, there's a lot of other types of tile in the house.
Yeah, unlike some of the houses we see, tile wasn't the dominant thing here. It was the windows and the ironwork really
and the glass,
seemed to be the special features, and that fireplace.
Right.
So I think there's, and then we don't know. There is tile on the risers of the two stairways at the rear doors. I think the owners were assuming that this isn't original. I'm kind of with them. There was definitely the level of the patio. The patio itself looked really old and looked good, but there's something strange happening the way it relates to the stairs, as if that level was raised. The ironwork I'd have to compare directly, but this does look like older wrought ironwork, and could be original. And if that were original, we might start looking at the stairs differently. So some of it becomes a little, unless you start digging really deep, you have to just do a little guesswork. This tile, if the commission does vote to kind of put a condition for the pool, this could kind of set as, wouldn't have to match this necessarily, but the concept of design on neutral background or something.
So before we make a motion, which may or may not, depending on the motion, whoever makes the motion includes a long-term plan to retile that space, do we want to hear from
I think it's
the owners
fair,
again?
when
Yes.
especially when we're
All right.
looking at timeframes, to
Yeah.
make sure that people are comfortable with that. But if they're not, you're not bound by
Right.
that.
So Kathleen, we want to open the public hearing up again, just hear your reaction to this, and then we'll come up with a motion.
I guess it's not alien to me that that tile is a factor. I mean, it looks like there should be a mid-century house in the front of the lot.
Yeah.
Granted, we've been in a big drought, and the idea of draining a pool to retile it seems not proper. However, that doesn't mean that issue couldn't be addressed at some point, and if we had mills, it's tit for tat. That's not, I don't object to doing the work. I have more issues about water than. What I don't think you saw, Arlene, is when we first looked at the house, I reacted to all the cement, and we've already greened. There's a patio in front of all this that is probably 20 by 20 at least, where those doors come off, and that area.
Oh,
We've-
it's a little better.
It
shot.
was completely enclosed and walled in, and we've greened it up. The hedge is in. We planted a tree in the middle. I don't think the patio tile is the original tile. However, the doors, the door ironwork, I think all that is original. I know that the facing tile on those back steps is actually Mexican tile. It's Talavera tile. You can buy it at Mission, but it's been made for a long time, and I love that tile, but I also don't know that it's compatible with a pool. It's kind of porous and
Yeah.
way
The
funkier.
tile isn't very straight.
The house has a mix of cultures in it. The brothers who built it were Italian. There was they fell in love with Spanish. They fell in love with Mayan. They fell in love with Mexican. The stairs to the front of the door is faced with Mexican tile as well. So there's different. The exterior tiles seem to go a couple of different ways, and in a perfect world, I would not have the patio look like that. But that's probably far more than to overhaul the whole thing. I mean, there's some easy things we could do, which is we could correct the slump stone with cement skim coat like we did on the patio, which you haven't seen the low wall that was there. But that could change it. The tile in the pool is probably the most dominant thing, though.
What would be a reasonable time frame for you?
I don't
in
know.
replacing the
I mean, I'm more. That's not going to fall apart. I want to make sure the windows are in good shape, and the screens, I believe, are the original screens. The structures, those all need restoration. The wood frames.
If you put a condition on it that the pool tile should be replaced sometime, would a 3 to 5 year window be reasonable?
If you could come up to the microphone.
Yeah.
It's being recorded.
Sorry, she's not on the.
Before you answer that, can I just ask a quick
Yeah.
question? When you had the house inspected and everything, did you have the pool looked at? Did anyone give you a rough age on the plaster? Because plaster does have to get replaced.
Well, I know. There's a
seven-
story about the owners drinking in the backyard and watching the guy dynamite the hillside, basically to make the pool.
Yeah.
And jackhammer it, and.
But you didn't have a pool inspector look at the plaster or to give
nothing's-
you an idea of the
No,
condition
and
of it or
nothing's
anything
leaking
like that.
or anything like that. We've had to replace equipment, but it's a saltwater pool.
I'm just thinking
and
if
that's
the
a nice
condition
thing, but
were something along
it
the lines
works.
of-
It's I noticed that grout's starting to diminish. All that stuff needs to be redone, but in terms of, I have no idea, and I've estimated a lot of jobs at this point with the place, but I have no idea what that
Yeah.
if it's within means or way beyond. You
Yeah,
know?
I was just thinking if you had the pool looked at and they said, oh yeah, you're going to need to replaster it in 5 years. It seems like that at the time you go to replaster the pool, which has to be done anyway.
Yeah.
It will have to be done. They always do.
It's not rough or anything.
Yeah.
It works, but
I was thinking maybe the condition could be that at the time the pool has to be replastered, then they do the tile, because it doesn't seem right necessarily to have to
Yeah.
drain the pool to do the
I-
tile,
I-
and
I
then a
would-
few years later drain the pool to do the
Appreciate
plaster.
that, because I think it is probably a
Probably
really
huge.
major undertaking.
Yeah.
And one of the first things that did bother us was that tile upon first inspection of the house. And so I don't know about 3 to 5 years. I honestly don't know what kind of cost basis we're looking
Yeah.
at for doing that kind of work. But I agree, if there's a way to sort of combine it with replastering and any other major maintenance, that would be great.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no mechanism in our staff ability to monitor that would make that happen. We have to look at conditions as, on a timeline. Now, one thought would be similar to what happened with the property on Royal. The reason we're allowed to continue hearings to a future date, whether it's a date certain or date uncertain, is to give you the opportunity to do your research and get some bids, find out, is it a high-ticket item or not? If it's a price that works for you, and then you see what your time frame is. When we come back to another hearing here, you present your information, and then the commission makes a decision. We don't always like doing that, but I think that's the fairest thing to do if the commission is inclined to want the tile to be replaced. I'm not sure that I have full consensus on that, so we'll have to have that discussion once we close the hearing.
It may be a messier job than it is a big job. It may not be that big a deal. I don't know.
Is
But
it below the
History
water
can be
line,
very messy.
Yeah.
tile?
It's
Yeah.
above,
It's kind of,
but for the most part. But you would have to drain the pool.
you have to drain the pool.
I think what you're trying to get at anyway is a time frame of 3 to 5 years as just sort of an initial baseline is agreeable. I don't think it's unreasonable, but if there's a process in place to go out, get bids, and then reconvene, let's do that. So we're very willing to abide by whatever you want to specify. And I think for our own knowledge, even if we didn't bring this before you for a Mills Act, we should know for ourselves what we're in for. So if that's a process that exists anyway, we'll do the homework and get some bids, definitely.
And we're thinking about other timelines that we put on properties. This is a smaller project than many of the projects that we've given. I don't think we've ever given a 5-year timeline, three, except for maybe one. No, not even that project. So I think that, we'll close the hearing. We'll see first if there's a majority of opinion that does want to see the tile replaced. If that's the case, then they can vote to continue the hearing, and we'll reschedule the hearing once you come back and let us know, rather than approve or deny based on this issue. So.
And may I ask if you do agree to continue the hearing, because how do these circle back around? Are they once a month, these hearings?
Yeah, they're
or are they,
once a month.
So potentially it could be a month from now if we have information. We could be
Potentially.
on. If you're ready to chat.
Yes.
Potentially, okay.
They wouldn't likely go before council on this anyway till later, way later.
Yeah,
in the year
we're
anyway.
say we go to council in the fall.
Yeah, so I mean,
So we have
there's still plenty of time. Whether you come to us next month or not, there's still
Good,
plenty of
just wanted to get a sense of the time frame. Great, that's great.
Okay,
And Beth, if you could fill out a speaker card when you're done.
thank you.
We'll do it.
Okay.
And we'll close the public hearing again, and then decide on the type of motion that we want to make. Does someone want to make a motion, and we'll just see if we can vote it through? Anybody
Well, I
have
make
a motion?
to continue this agenda item for a later date, so that gives the owners time to take a look at the cost and the time frame that would be appropriate to replace the pool tile as one of the conditions, along with the staff mentioned conditions, including the garage door.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Roll call on the vote for the motion. To
Well,
continue.
Armane's not here.
Your harmony.
Commissioner Shire,
Yes?
Commissioner Morgan,
Yes.
Commissioner Crignati,
Yes.
Chair Vidor.
Yes.
Okay, so motion passes 4-0. This will be continued to a date uncertain. It will be dependent on when the applicants come back to me with information telling me they're ready to move forward.
Okay. We'll
And
try to
do it as soon as we can.
expedite. Mhm. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We look forward to hearing from you again. Good. Okay. So the next item is the home on Bruce Street, and we'll have the staff report first.
All right. Did you want music or no music?
No.
Music. Music.
Public
Well-
need the music.
Let's get some music flowing. Still playing. Is this still Lauren?
It's the fairest. Does that say fairest?
This isn't the word. Oh, my. Oh, this is inappropriate. We can't promulgate religion from our government seat.
In the interest of historic,
Let's skip the music. I see this going in a direction. We don't
somebody
wanna go.
jumps into this meeting on TV in the middle and sees this, they
Yeah.
might wonder what's going on.
Could cost him
We
his
know
job.
Well, it was a lot of effort, Jay. We wanted to give you credit for
Thank you,
arranging
thank
the
you.
organ music.
Yeah, we're at the last
very
minute
nice.
thinking to throw it up there. So. Okay, here we are. This is the home of organist Lauren Whitney at 1242 Bruce Avenue. We're located in kind of western edge of Glendale, between Glen Oaks and Glenwood on Bruce. I didn't check, but just looking at the map, I'm beginning to wonder if this is our westernmost property that we've considered, at least that I can remember. I can't say that for sure, but we're starting to chart the map more.
I think
Oh, you're right.
Grand-
You're
Grand
right.
view.
You're right. Let me.
Just on.
Oh,
just barely.
the
oh,
street.
right. It's
Just barely. Although maybe going straight
Further
north, it might
north.
not be, but as far as streets go. It's on Grandview.
You're completely correct. Yeah, this may be the southwestern.
There we go.
It is the
There we go.
southwest. You just took
Sorry to burst your bubble, sir.
Okay, here we go. Let me get the staff report ready. So, staff had the application for this property, which was built in 1939 in this neighborhood, a very eclectic, interesting architectural amalgam. The applicant suggested Tudor Revival and French Eclectic, which are two of the recognized styles we have in Glendale. I kind of, in the staff report, decided to make a decision, and I kind of went with French Eclectic. It felt closer to that for me, so forgive me if you're upset about that, but I think it fits into a lot of the features that we see in this very picturesque style. And we don't have a lot of properties like this, and this is clearly the work of an interesting architect. His name, which we know, was Ernest Irving Fries. The house was built by the Royal Kent Company, and it was built for organist Lauren Whitney, so it's got a lot of original connections. Whitney was a friend and, I believe, neighbor of Roy Kent. Roy Kent was one of the key builders in the history of early Glendale. As with other builders, this one has kind of an interesting story to it, but we can't really make a connection that this is an important work in Kent's career. It's generally hard to do that with builders anyways. So in the application, staff was recommending that we not recognize it for its association with Kent. I can't remember. I'll just go through the slides. I can't remember how I laid this out exactly. Here's a picture of Lauren Whitney in his house in Glendale. This is one of these applications that I always particularly enjoy because it's someone who I had never heard of. I'm not sure that any of our commissioners had heard of. But the more you unpeel the onion, you find, very interesting story here. Interesting layers of meaning and a pretty deep connection with Glendale, which kind of puts us in a different situation than we were with last year with the Art Baker House, which council ultimately chose not to designate, primarily because the house had been altered, which is not the case. This house is very intact, and also because the owner didn't have a long or deep connect. Well, he had a connection with Glendale, but his ownership in that property was fairly short term. Whitney lived in this house from 1939 to 1975. He had the house built for the organ, so Kent specifically engineered the house for the organ. And while we're very used to seeing steeply pitched roofs for these Tudor and French eclectic houses, just looking at this roof, there's something different going on here. So it's kind of a little visual clue from the outside that something was happening on the inside. And just like the tile fireplace in the previous property we discussed, we're not looking at any of these interior features, but they do seem to be of interest here, even though we can't protect them through our code. So we'll mention those in a minute. Looking at just the eclectic detailing, some of the key features here, this doorway, the door is original, the kind of entry surround with a mixture of brick and stone coins and then woodwork, this crazy chimney with the stone reveals. My personal favorite detail is this little dovecote birdhouse here, which normally we see up in the gables or up on a roof. I've never seen one kind of just stuck next to the chimney like this, but it sure adds to the overall picturesque feel, the leaded glass, the bay window. Really kind of makes this stand out in its neighborhood of more kind of typical modest residential homes. Loren Whitney started his career as an evangelistic musician. He was an organist. He had originally played other instruments. His life was music and religion. He came to be known first through being a member of the Good Ship Grace, which was a musical group of singers, and he was the organist. I include this slide because this is one of the wonderful features of LA architecture. This is a historic cultural monument in Silver Lake on Hyperion, still standing today, and this was the recording studio for the Good Ship Grace, and it was called the Haven of Rest. So kind of the connection here from his earlier career to his life in Glendale is that he went on to build a recording studio in Glendale that became one of our major businesses and one of our few kind of music-related businesses for recording. Here are those interior shots that I generally don't show, but again, this helps us understand why the roof is shaped like it is. On the left, we have the alcove where his organ was contained, so he's facing us, and the organ was up against the left-hand wall there. And then you have these kind of screen elements up on the coved roof, which open directly into the chamber where the pipes for the organ were. And then the chamber was also designed to be kind of a resonance chamber to build kind of the sound for the organ, all of which is a pretty unusual feature for a relatively modestly sized suburban house. Here's a brochure from the Whitney Recording Studio, which he founded not far from the house on Glen Oaks. This became a major center of religious recordings because he made sure that he brought another theater organ even grander than the one he put in the house into the recording studio. So it was used over the years not just for religious recordings. Billy Joel recorded, I'm not a big fan, but that song, Captain Jack, thank you, which uses the organ that Whitney put into the studio. And then after the studio, after he moved, ultimately in 1978, the studio was sold to MCA. All along, it was considered a state-of-the-art studio. It had solid-state recording devices before those were common features. And even in the 70s, before he sold it, so while Whitney still owned it, a number of recording artists who you think of as being quite divergent from the music that we heard before were recording there. So it definitely was a place that had meaning for not just the religious broadcasting and recording, but for pop and rock artists. One interesting feature of the home organ is that he had it connected via wire connections direct to radio stations so he could do live organ broadcasts from his home. Again, these are just little details that kind of bring him to life. Interesting, nice article about him in the LA Times from 1983, talking about the studio and his career, and then a couple of examples of his recordings that the owner, the applicant, I don't know that you have the largest Loren Whitney collection out there, but biggest one I've ever seen. So. Going back to the architects, this guy is really kind of interesting. Ernest Irving Free's picture there. He has this autobiography that he did kind of his amusing little sketch for. But he seems to have been more of a writer than an architect. We don't know. In the application, there's a picture of a relatively modest kind of Tudor Revival-looking house that we know he designed, but don't know too much else about his career. Again, this is one of these room for future research situations where we can't at staff level say that he's significant or that the house is significant for its association with him, but definitely, like a few of our other architects, someone who we would love to learn more about over time. So here are some of the articles that he was writing. He seemed to be quite prolific because online there's a lot of stuff out there, and I assume there's more beyond what's been scanned and put on the web. So So he's definitely an architect of interest. Here's the original drawings for the house that the owner has. And you can see, unlike many of our projects in Glendale, that it looks like it was built very close to what was designed, including the front door with those octagonal panels right there in the drawings. As we come around to the side and the rear of the property, and I'm sorry I don't have better photos of the other side or the back of the house, but this is pretty much sums up what's going on. Plain stucco walls, punched window openings, steel sash all the way around the house except for one window that we'll talk about. And this is typical of a lot of development in Glendale where the money was put up front, and once you come around to the sides and the back you have simpler facades. The original garage was added to in 1951 by Whitney, so we can look at this as a change made to the property that was part of the period of significance since he was the first owner and then he owned it for much of his life. There's an original covered patio that you start seeing on the left side of the upper picture, and then you have this nice flagstone barbecue unit that was part of that addition. So the right-hand side is the garage, and then the left-hand portion with the lower roof is the addition from 1951. So based on the connection with Lauren Whitney, who does seem to be a very interesting figure in Glendale, I can see, as with Art Baker, a question about where that significance lies in terms of how noted he is today. But ultimately, I don't think that matters. The point of history is that we learn things, we learn about new people, and so staff is supporting designation under Criterion 2 for its association with Whitney, and we are also supporting it under Criterion 3 for the quality of its architecture, the design by Fries. We can't quite say that he's a genius who influenced his profession, but kind of an interesting guy and definitely an interesting house. I guess I didn't have another picture. There's this one window that you can see in the right-hand picture here, that in the left-hand picture is kind of over here, right where the brick comes in. This is a replacement window. I think it was wood. It's definitely not in keeping with the steel sash on the house. Doesn't look horrible, but definitely has different sight lines and proportions than the historic windows. So staff is recommending that the commission consider a condition to replace that window, similarly to the previous house we discussed, with either a new steel or possibly an aluminum window. The garage door is also a replacement. Oops. Oh, we can barely see it here. It's a white aluminum door that has the kind of glazed panels at the top. This isn't quite as prominent as the door on the previous house you considered, but particularly because of those glass panels, it does stand out as an alteration that you may consider asking for a replacement. That's everything.
Okay. So let's go in reverse and start with the back of the... we have speaker. I'm sorry. David Miller, come on up. Come on down, David Miller.
Hi, I'm David Miller. Thank you all for considering this house and for coming by the property. You can come by another time. And thank you for preparing all of this. My wife and I lived in Studio City for 15 years in a pretty boring house in a pretty flat area of the valley, and we always liked it over here. And we started looking at houses, and we actually put a bid in on a house off of Harvey over in that part of Glendale. And the very day we put that offer in, we saw this house, and we put an offer in on this house the next morning and opened escrow the day after that. So when we first saw the listing for this house, we saw that lattice plasterwork in the ceiling, and my initial reaction was that it was for maybe an air filtration system for cigar smokers, or I didn't know what it was. And then we got to the house, and the selling agent told us the story. So she knew everything about Lauren Whitney. We're only the fourth owners of the house, which I think in some ways makes it unusual because so many houses get sold and turned over. But she had all the original blueprints, original assessment records, building permits, all the way back to 1939. That Lauren Whitney contracted with Roy Kent and the architect. So they had this treasure trove of paperwork. And she told us the story of Lauren, and I went online and and thank you, Jay. I bought some records just because I wanted to know what it sounded like. And it's kind of neat because we have a little turntable in that alcove space. And like I mentioned earlier, my wife only lets me play the Christmas album because it's the most sort of generic of all of his records. But it's really fun to hear that organ music in the space again. There is the speaker you saw in the picture there. There's a giant speaker still up in the rafters, which I think was either part of his broadcasting over the radio or he also recorded albums in the living room. So some of the albums that, I don't know if any of the ones that I own are from that space, but he recorded records in that space. And I don't quite understand the mechanics of it, but it was really fascinating to find all this out. A couple of other things about the house. When we first saw it and drove up to it, it's interesting, the chimney is such a prominent feature, but when we first saw the house, there was a giant bird of paradise that basically went from the neighbor's property to our front door, and it was as tall as the chimney. So we didn't really know the chimney was there. We saw the bay window and all the brick facade and this ridiculous roof, and we thought, well, something's kind of cool about this house. We didn't know what it was exactly. So we took the bird of paradise out, and the only other thing we did to the chimney was we put in a stainless steel liner with this spark arrestor and rain cap on there, so it'll preserve for another 100 years. And then the only other thing about this house, which is a cool story, and I think I actually told Commissioner Vartanian. I don't know if I told anybody else. Forgive me if I did tell one of you. I don't remember. In doing research about Lorne Whitney and the organ that was in this house, I found out that I did tell you. I did find out that when they left the house in 1975, either before they moved out or before they moved out, they had the organ taken out of the house, and it was installed in a church up in Seattle, Washington. And it was there for a few years. And then it was decommissioned from that church when that church raised funds to buy another organ. And then that organ was then moved into a silent movie theater in Salem, Oregon, which is where I would go every weekend with my mom on the bus to see movies. And so that organ was in that movie theater at the time when I was a kid, sitting in that movie theater watching movies. And then just a couple of years ago, we went up to Salem to visit my mom. We took her back to that theater. And the guy, it was a silent movie night, and he was doing Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin movies, and he was playing the organ. It's not that organ anymore. It was since been taken out, and the private owner has it in his organ collection. I guess people do that. But I spoke to the organist that evening, and his dad was at the theater that night, and I said, I don't know if you know Lorne Whitney. He goes, oh, yeah, sure. And he says, Dad, come here. These guys, they live in the Lorne Whitney house. So the man that was playing the organ that evening and his father actually installed the organ in that movie theater when it came from the church in Seattle. So apparently I'm supposed to own this house. So that was just a fun story that we found, and we really got into this whole idea of preserving it just because I'm a member of the Historical Society, so we're just real advocates of trying to save the things that we have. And I was afraid that if ever, we're not living there, I just didn't want someone to just ruin it. So that's why we got into this process. And then we learned about all these other things. So that's it. I don't know if you have any questions. Or...
Anybody?
No.
Okay, great.
I talked to you off over the weekend.
Okay, well, that was interesting.
Right, thank you.
So much for Studio City. You're in interesting territory now. Well, that's great. So we'll close the public hearing and start with S.
Oh, start with that. Okay. S would be me.
Reverse. Yes.
Well, anyway, thank you for bringing this before us, especially just to protect it, because those of us with a passion for preserving what we do have appreciate homeowners like you. And this house has an amazing story, and I can't believe it. I mean, you were literally meant to have this house. That is so fabulous. Anyway, the story is about. Oh, can you show the picture of the house? It's just easier to see it when we're talking.
Front facade?
The front, sure.
There you go.
Anyway, I just think this house has such rich history, spiritual history, just amazing that someone would build a house around their organ. It resonated with me because my grandmother played the organ, and their retirement home in Colorado was built for the organ. And so just, you never think that this happens to anybody else, but it's kind of cool. But yeah, you guys have just been amazing stewards of this house, protecting it, just preserving it, restoring what you can, bringing the house back so you can actually see the beautiful front facade. I mean, that's just, when you just look at that and your eye wanders all around the front facade to these beautiful details, intricate and kind of a random collection of architecture, but it all fits together so like wonderfully, and it just like you look at the house and it looks like it has a story to tell. So I appreciate that. I completely agree with staff's recommendation that it should be on the register. Obviously, there's very little to do the house. I would agree also with just the one window replacement and the garage door. But I think it's already in your plan because you've been amazing caretakers of it so far. So anyway, thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I agree with Commissioner Shire on all of the things, but you had me when you had Royal Kent. I mean, I love his architecture in Glendale. He is just the man. Unfortunately, a lot of his architecture has now disappeared on Brand Boulevard. So anytime you can save one of his houses, I'm all for it. Like in the other couple, the house seeked out the person for it, and I think you're the perfect person for this house. The only sad part about putting on a Glendale register is the interior is very interesting, but it's not protected. So if somebody could come in at a later date and change it to something else. But I agree with staff said. I agree on both of them. It's on criteria 2 and criteria 3. I used, and I hate to say this again, but I used to ride my bicycle past the Whitney Studios. So, but it didn't mean anything at the time because I was just a little kid. So, but I think he was influential in the city of Glendale.
Did your parents know about this? Because you've ridden your bike every day.
I did, but back,
Far, Mike.
And it's Glendale.
That's far.
but it is Glendale, and in Glendale, all my friends were on that side of town anyway. So they were over at Cleveland, so it wasn't a big deal to go down there. But I agree with staff. I agree that it should be on the Glendale register. I agree with the things the staff has asked you to do, and like you said, with the garage door, it was just a gift from your real estate agent. So changing it or not, it's not going to be the end of the world. So, but I love the house. It's just so different. If you stand in the yard and turn around and look at all the houses in the neighborhood, there's nothing like it. It's just, I could just see Mr. Whitney and Mr. Kent out there going, okay, and I want to put my organ over here, and I want to do this, and I want to do that. And he had the architect that knew how to do it, and they accomplished a wonderful thing. So I'm all for it.
Yes, I concur. Thank you for bringing it forward. I think it's a great little house. It too looks like a painting. It's just so charming. All the detail is really great. And like Commissioner Shire said, somehow you were just drawn to this house. Have you ever played the organ? Is it something that maybe you should take up at some point? But anyway, thank you. And not to belabor the point, but thank you very much. And I agree with everything that staff has put in the report and what the commissioners have said.
Well, I'll be paying you a visit too, because I would certainly love to see the house. And it's funny that you mentioned the connection to such an amazing story, because when I first looked at it, I said, this is a storybook house. And it kind of, does fit that mold, you have to admit, especially with that incredible fantasy roof line. But no, it's quite a house, and I agree with all the commissioners, and I also feel that the Mills Act criteria are correct and should be instated for you in the contract. But I find the fact, not only Whitney's organ playing and the fact that he recorded and transmitted from his house and was himself a musician of some repute, I think the connection to the Whitney Studios, which, the Whitney name was attached quite late, even after, who bought the studio again? I can't remember.
MCA.
Yeah, MCA. It was still the MCA Whitney Studio, and a lot of very famous people recorded, and I think I had that, I just went a little nuts after I read the report and I got online, because the music angle was really interesting to me, and I probably spent an hour cruising all over the internet and realized I was collecting way too much information. But when I got to it actually wasn't the best studio. It was Captain Beefheart recorded his best album on Glen Oaks. So, there was a lot of hyperbole about that studio coming from the music world, and that was a time that meant a lot to people of a certain age, musically speaking, and it seemed to me that association was very significant too. And I'm kind of sorry there wasn't that studio wasn't preserved. Obviously, it maybe wasn't as famous as some other studios, but clearly his name is attached to that, and he is significant, if not for the house, certainly for that. So
If you want to give me your list of artists who recorded there, we'll slip it into the file just for the.
Okay, we'll make a Whitney playlist of all the famous people who recorded
Which
at that
Beefheart
studio.
record?
What?
Do you know which Beefheart record? You said it was this.
I don't have. It was a long. It was a geek conversation site I was on, so you can imagine, and these people were just going on and on and on for pages. So I didn't copy the whole thing, but I would be happy to help you compile a playlist. I'm inspired. Anyway, thank you very much. So we can, I think, move on. And nobody has any other comments or questions. We can get a motion going for this one.
I just wanted to say one more thing. There's also such a unique coincidence because we have MCA who bought the studio today at our hearing, and we also had an MCA president that lived in their house.
Oh, that's true. Right.
Oh, we've never had that kind of connection with two houses.
Wow.
I mean, it's interesting.
Connections everywhere.
The owners who lived in our house.
They could just come up to the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to drag this out, but no, the owners who.
Yeah, we're opening the hearing.
It's history. Go
We're
ahead.
opening the past agenda items hearing.
The owners who lived in our house for 35 years prior to us were, Bob Seiner was the head of MCA Records, 70s, not 80s. And, they had, there's a speakeasy in the basement. They had lots of parties. There were, gold records all over the walls and pictures of everybody who'd ever been there. And so it was kind of, when I heard MCA, was it the same time?
You bought it in the late 70s.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Right.
so it was close, That's really karmic. Okay.
And the MCA and Whitney name.
Thank God I don't have a swimming pool.
In addition, we don't usually have the owners from the early nomination stay for the second, but you guys were drawn to this.
That's
I
right.
know, it's good.
There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on here. Yes. And we would like you to repurchase the organ, find it, and put it back. I'm just
Can
kidding.
bring it back.
Anyway, do we have a motion?
If in your motion you could also give us a time frame for the conditions,
Okay.
and you can nod yes if it's okay, or no, we'll open the public hearing.
Motion?
Hold on. You do such a better job.
Yeah.
All right,
you're the
I'll make a
I miss
motion.
too many
Commissioner.
things.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to make a motion to recommend to City Council that the property at 1242 Bruce Avenue be called the Whitney House and be designated as a historic register and also be added to the Mills Act contract. There are two conditions that we'd like to add would be replacement of the one wood window with one that's steel or more appropriate to the style of the others, and the replacement of the garage door to be more in keeping with the architecture of the home. And for this, I would suggest a 2-year. Do I have any nods?
Yeah.
2-year? 3-year?
2.
2-year.
This is in the range that you often do one.
Is it from today or from council's approval?
It'll be from December, probably.
Okay.
Okay, a 2-year time frame for the replacement work.
Okay. Second?
Second.
All in, roll
Wait.
call.
Oh, you.
Yeah.
I thought you were seconding, but you were asking.
No, I asked
Okay,
for a
go ahead.
second from Mike,
Yeah, I
and
know.
we can have the roll call.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I always forget.
I could say all in favor and we go aye,
They've
but-
changed the policy.
Oh, the
so,
schedule?
Yeah, let's leave
They
whatever.
can't stay?
All right.
So, Commissioner, who made the motion? Commissioner Shire?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Seconded it.
Commissioner Crignani?
Yes.
And Chair Vidor?
Yes.
4-0, the motion passes. We'll take this to council, so.
Congratulations.
Hey, congratulations, and we look forward to visiting and seeing the owners of Mountain again.
Me too.
So we now have a planning update and any informational briefings?
No
Nothing to
updates.
report? Then we're adjourned. Thank you.